3 children were peeking around the corner of a Duradent store at a figure off in the distance. "There is the Skyfisher," whispered the boy named Birdie. "She is so creepy. I have seen her standing on a subway air vent before, and it blows all those little hooks on her antler hat up around her. She waits for birds so she can catch and murder them." Juniper looked through the holes in her blanket. "Did Dick and Jane ever do that?" "No," exclaimed Birdie, while Flutter added, "Well, not that we know of. We didn't find all the books yet." "She is psycho," continued Birdie to the girls, and with a smirk Flutter replied, "You are just bitter because you got caught in one of her hooks that time." Flutter was alluding to an event where Birdie rushed around a corner only to be caught in a maelstrom of hooks that had to be painfully detached by a silent, disapproving Skyfisher. She spoke only one time while the children watched her removing the hooks. "Be still, little Birdie," she said in a monotone as he fidgeted. All the kids laughed, and from that point on it became his nickname, Birdie. "She nearly killed me," Whisper yelled Birdie dramatically. "If just one of those hooks—" "Shh! Be still, little Birdie," said Juniper, with a smile in her voice. "Be still, little Birdie," said Flutter, laughing. Then, after seeming to contemplate for a moment, she said, "I think I will follow her today." Juniper said nothing beneath her blanket, and Birdie turned to leave. "You two are crazy. I'm not going anywhere near her." Juniper and Flutter continued to watch until the great tower's bell rang a few minutes later. The Skyfisher wore a headdress fashioned from deer antlers and twigs. Strings with fishing hooks attached hung from them as she walked slowly down the street towards the spot she had gone to many times before. It was an area where winds converged. Gusts from the rooftops and breezes snaking in from the alleyways all met to make a whirlpool of air that lifted the hooks and strings above the ground. They floated behind the Skyfisher like a sharp nimbus. She checked the lines to make sure they were not tangled, and then, satisfied, she turned to look down the street to a tree full of singing birds. She flicked her finger, and a hook on a string attached to the hem of her vintage dress. She lifted her finger like a pulley, causing the hook to raise the hem, giving the Skyfisher more freedom to walk. She murmured, "Do birds sing? Because all is right in the world. Or are their minds just feeble, like flags unfurled?" She looked past the tree to the ancient clock tower rising behind it. Time had broken the clock piece, reducing it to only one chime in the day. That chime was approaching, and she felt a touch of melancholy mixed with determination. The bell began its toll, and the birds, startled, erupted from the tree to fly past her like a school of undulating fish. The Skyfisher felt the occasional tug as her hooks plucked birds from the sky. She closed her eyes and covered her ears for a while until the twitching was done. It was a nice catch today, she thought, as she wiped away a stray tear. After the Skyfisher began to walk away, Juniper and Flutter crept down the street to where she had been. "Do you think she eats them?" asked Flutter, looking a little worried. "No, but she has been doing this a while, I can tell. She knows the wind patterns and when the bell will chime. She made the antler headdress with hooks. That's not easy. There are thousands of years of food in the VR pod canisters, so there is no reason to eat the birds, really. Let's go ask her. Wait, what? Just ask her. She doesn't talk to anyone. She is always lurking. Juniper laughed. She talked to Birdie. And in a darker voice, she intoned, "Be still, little birdie." "Be still, little birdie," mirrored Flutter, and the two girls laughed. After a pause, Juniper continued, "You talked to me, even though I was always hidden under this blanket." "Right, well, you seemed kind of sad and alone. The Skyfisher is more, I don't know, dark and imposing, but dignified somehow. I don't think she would want me to talk to her." "I see some of myself in her," said Juniper, "wanting to be alone, but also desiring to be around people, but not sure how to. I wanted you to talk to me." A loud beep from a computer console drew Flutter's attention to the building beside them. Positive News Plus! I read about them. They were a channel that only played news stories that you liked. This is how it worked. Under the blanket, Juniper smiled as Flutter began to interpret in detail what she had learned about Positive News Plus. Juniper thought about how she liked how curious Flutter was, how she would go through the dusty remains of the world that had once been, and would try to find meaning, almost like an anthropologist. Juniper was very aware how odd it was to the other kids, the way she always hid underneath a blanket, and she adored Flutter for how she barely noticed the blanket at all. She cherished how Flutter could prattle away about some obscure topic related to the old world. Juniper comfortably listened, yet Flutter always could detect when she was smiling, even though she could not see below the covers. As the girls were walking down the street, Zinger suddenly veered over into a shop where there roamed a pack of other Zinger the Rocket dogs. They seemed to be Power Pet display merchandise from the store before it was abandoned, but they still lingered near the shop. Some wore attachments for sports, while others had TVs and caster apparatus. Zinger and the other dogs frolicked and played while the girls watched. Should we look for a default head attachment to replace Singer's gramophone? Asked Flutter. Juniper replied, No, this is the Zinger I know and love. I find the attachments kind of disturbing. Flutter tried to peer under the blanket, while Juniper pulled it down tight to annoy her. Why disturbing? Juniper thought for a moment. I just don't know why people would think an organic dog needed things to improve it. Their flaws are kind of part of what they are. They are companions, not a tool for us. It feels like a manufactured desire. You mean like the Diamonds Are Forever slogan and things like that? Said Flutter. Juniper's indistinct blanket-shaped head turned to Flutter. Seriously, Flutter, how... Flutter broke in defensively. I like to read. That's how I know about it. They made everyone think diamonds were the most important thing. OK, fine. Juniper considered for a moment. Well, so that example works. Diamond engagement rings are pretty useless now. They are on every nightstand beside VR pods around the world. Flutter was silent a bit, watching the dogs play. Do you think the sleepers in the pods buy each other VR diamonds and things? Yes, replied Juniper. If someone tells them to. Juniper and Flutter entered a glowing room with an animatronic woman on a pulpit. She held both a microphone and child. Oh, this is Mary Karaoke, said Juniper. We saw her last winter, remember? Yes, said Flutter. But this is in one of the churcades. Flutter read Juniper's silence as encouragement to continue. OK, so a giant company bought the rights for Mary and Jesus from the church, as few were attending anymore. The company rebranded Mary into Mary Karaoke, and she was this kind of singing sensation. The churches became church arcades or churcades, where you played a kind of dancing rhythm video game while singing popular songs and talking about, you know, being nice. So this area is the rave nave, and they would even have snacks and things. Juniper thought about it a moment and said, Sounds kind of fun. It was the main religion. Flutter smiled, happy to be able to explain more. No, so it was popular, but the main one was apparently called Mother Earth. Essentially, everyone began to feel like the Earth was a living organism. Flutter stopped a moment, gathering her thoughts to explain. OK, so how I understand it is every single living organism is made of the Earth. All the components that make us, like our bodies, is part of the planet itself. And we are kind of born from the Earth. We are animated, and then we die and sink back into the Earth, and all our atoms and things return to the soil. So yeah, we are the Earth animated. You mean I am made of dirt? Juniper said wryly. No. Well, kind of. OK, yes. Juniper bent down to the soil and took out her water bottle. So if I pour some water onto the soil here and shape it into a ball, it is still made up of the dirt on the ground, just kind of formed into a sphere. The difference is we are manufactured from the ground, but we are animated, like alive. So the surface of the planet is living, and all life is kind of birthed from it, and then eventually sinks back into it when we die, only to be assembled again in an endless cycle, all using the same materials. Juniper nodded, then added, OK, so then I guess everything's DNA is a bit like directions or computer code, or maybe a template for our cells to build us, and that's all planned by the whole Earth or the Earth's surface? But then, Why would the Earth design humans, which were more like a destructive parasite? Flutter shrugged. I don't know. I'm not saying I believe it. It's just fun to think about. Like that simulation theory, where we are all living in a VR world, and our perceived reality is just a powerful computer simulation created by a higher being. Okay, that is silly, but let's not start a whole new conversation, okay? Let's just go. Juniper looked at Flutter for a moment without saying anything. How do you even know all this stuff, Flutter? I listen during Milkdrop's classes. And, well, I read most things. Okay, everything I find, said Flutter defensively. Don't look at me all weird under there. I spend all my time under a blanket, Flutter. I am not going to call you weird. Anyway, let's go meet the Skyfisher. Juniper and Flutter came upon the Skyfisher in the old Klaxon 5 theatre. She was approaching a stage with a large constructed ladder of chairs rising up into the darkness. Hi, said Juniper. Hello, said Flutter. The Skyfisher turned to observe them with an unreadable gaze. After a somewhat short and uncomfortable silence, Flutter was compelled to make conversation by saying, Oh, another bunch of stacked chairs in here, I see. I've always wondered who stacks them. They are all over the... I assemble them, said the Skyfisher matter-of-factly. Juniper and Flutter couldn't hide their surprise. You are the chair stacker? You do the shopping carts too? Yes, the shopping carts too. You are an artist then, like from the time before, said Flutter a bit wistfully. No, I am not an artist. The word art has lost all its meaning, really, replied the Skyfisher. Intrigued by the statement, Flutter asked, Why has it lost its meaning? Well, are you familiar with the artist Marcel Duchamp and the fountain? No, said Juniper. Yes, said Flutter, causing Juniper to sigh audibly. Marcel Duchamp entered a porcelain urinal into an art gallery exhibit, and the idea, I believe, was for people to try to forget the function of the urinal and just try to imagine it as a sculptural piece. The girls immediately accepted the rather unexpected conversation and listened attentively. Does taking the urinal out of a washroom and putting it in an art gallery change its meaning? Can its lines and form be appealing if you just look at it like a sculpture, to forget for a time its reality and imagine instead something new for it? Okay, said Flutter, processing. But why would that be wrong to get people to look at things in a different way? It's not, replied the Skyfisher. The problem was that people interpreted the act of putting a urinal into an art exhibit as meaning that everything was art. That an elephant from the zoo who was trained to hold a paintbrush in their trunk was an artist, and what they smeared on a wood board was art. That someone vomiting paint on a canvas or taping a banana to a wall were all creators of art. Everything became art, and then, simultaneously, nothing was art. A viral misconception of an idea. Juniper pondered this for a moment. In the VR pods, the sleepers all forget reality for a time and imagine something new. Does that mean that Milkdrop is an artist, since he created the space? And is each avatar art? I think there is an argument for that, said the Skyfisher, but I feel like there is a difference between being creative and creating art. Like we would not say that a child banging on a keyboard is a musician making music equal to Tchaikovsky. There are levels and layers, not a simple blanket term like the word art has become. I feel like the term art should describe something special, a rare culmination of a bunch of factors that all come together to create an artwork. Just then, a bird on a hook did a final quiver of its wings and became still. The Skyfisher closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself, then said, "I need to climb these chairs now and go somewhere." Juniper and Flutter looked at each other briefly and said, "Can we come too?" To which the Skyfisher immediately replied, "Yes, please." And the three girls, as well as Zinger, began climbing up the chairs on the stage, into the darkness above. The girls followed the Skyfisher over a path of precarious wooden planks stretched across the balconies of a building. Eventually they climbed over a shopping cart, past a broken window, and into a room filled with pods. The room was cleared of most unnecessary things, except a desk, upon which was an assortment of fairy dissection pictures and a few shadow boxes. The ever-present flowers had found their way into the apartment from the broken window. They filled the room with a light fragrance that didn't quite obscure the underlying scent of dust and decay. Juniper looked at the pale white moth girl pinned inside the shadow box and asked, "So, were fairies a real animal, or one of the bioprompt creatures?" "Weren't they insects?" asked Flutter. "No. The pictures show internal organs and things. They might be mammals," said the Skyfisher. "No, they were real creatures, like unicorns and seahorses," said Juniper. "What? Unicorns were not real?" exclaimed Flutter incredulously. "Sure they were. I saw some illustrations where they were on that giant boat during the flood. Noah's Ark. You know, where they had two of every creature and, well, the horses were jealous and pushed the unicorns off the boat. But then the unicorns turned into narwhals," said Juniper in a cheerful tone. "That is not at all true, Juniper. I know where you saw that, and it was in a comic strip. I read it too." "Well, how do you know the Dick and Janes are not comic books, or that the Bible is not one?" said Juniper. "Well, there were different categories of books," said Flutter, a bit exasperated. "The Bible was a fantasy book, or maybe a fairy tale. The Dick and Janes are history textbooks," said Flutter. "OK. Well, what about the Hunger Games?" asked Juniper. "Cookbook," replied Flutter. "Jaws," Juniper immediately shot back. And after a pause, Flutter ventured, "Dental hygiene." Juniper had just seen the title of the book and didn't read it, but she suspected Flutter of guessing based on the toothy cover picture of a shark. She wanted to be sure. "Clifford the Big Red Dog?" Flutter had an even longer pause before saying, "Horror?" "No!" exclaimed Juniper. "I knew you were making it up." "Well, what is it then?" demanded Flutter. "I read it, but I have no idea. But I do know it's not horror," said Juniper decisively. Both girls looked around to discover that the Skyfisher had already left into the flickering lights of the hallway. So, after just a bit more bickering, they quickly followed. "Teddy, why are there so many pictures of people with balls?" asked Gretchen. The old and broken toy robot replied, "The most important people in society, from before, were ones who could control balls really well." There were people who kicked balls with their feet, but could not touch them with their hands. Some hit balls with sticks, and others hit tiny balls into holes. Some would throw balls into mesh nets, while others hit them over nets with rackets. Some wore armour, others had uniforms, and a few wore bikinis. Gretchen considered this for a moment. But I thought doctors, scientists and police were the most important. Teddy's gears whirled slightly as he replied, "No, Gretchen. People who could manipulate balls the best were the most celebrated." The three girls climbed out of a sinkhole connected to the broken sewer they had just gone through. A huge sculpture of a spider loomed above, framing the Nouveau Deco museum. Behind, they could see one of the Skyfisher's large chair installations that seemed to have violins on hooks hanging from strings. "Oh, I didn't know about this museum," said Flutter excitedly. "The sewers are the only way to get here now, as most of the streets are blocked with debris," said the Skyfisher. Their steps echoed as they walked into the half-light of a gift shop and a few exhibits. One brightly lit display was entitled Neo Kawaii and seemed to show a surprisingly violent battle between cute things. A unicorn spewing acid rainbows, while baby harp seals advanced with sharpened sai. Another wing of the museum exhibited sculptures of the post-Flapperites, the second flapper movement from late in the century. The Skyfisher led them past these, while Flutter practically skipped around, gleefully taking in all the art from the past. "Oh, look at the Flapperites! They seem so confident!" Flutter exclaimed. "Why do they have long cigarettes? I thought everyone stopped smoking ages before that." "They didn't actually smoke them," explained Flutter. "They would just light both ends of the cigarette and carry them around." The Skyfisher stopped to ask Flutter, why would they burn from both ends? Didn't they need to inhale the toxins from one side? Well, so the row waders tried to damage the Flapperites in the public's opinion by making AI deep fakes of them doing terrible things. But the AI kept making images where the Flapperites had cigarettes lit on both ends, because the AI just didn't really understand the function of a cigarette, like what its purpose was. So it didn't realise that if you lit both ends of the cigarette, then a person would have to inhale from a lit side and burn their mouth. The AI could make convincing scenes, but it didn't really understand its own creation. So the Flapperites began to do things publicly that would confound the AI by training it to do clearly incorrect deep fakes. In the end, nobody really trusted anything anymore. How could society function if nobody trusted anything they heard or saw with their own eyes? Or smelled, added Flutter. There were also flavour scientists. But, Flutter continued, you were right. That is when Milkdrop made the VR pods, and everyone began to live in the virtual space. He said he could fully control the validity of what was in the virtual world, thus ensuring everyone was protected from misinformation and deceit, which was the business practice of most industries. Everyone is slowly starving to death in the pods, and they can't wake up, said the Skyfisher. Juniper and Flutter looked at each other. Actually, Milkdrop explained to us that the best thing for humanity was to start again, with us. He would show us how to do it right, where there was no greed or politics, religion and hate. Kind of trained the proper way. It's like the theory I've read, where something wanted to shape humans by giving us religious commandments to follow. You know, like the thou shalt not steal or murder kind of things. And then, after we were trained to be a certain way over a long period of time, then they could return, and we would not be like intellectually feral. Later, when humans were developing AI and using training to fashion artificial intelligence into something useful and safe, well, people began to see similarities, in a narcissistic sort of way. Humans saw themselves as ascending to godhood. We were creating life and miracles, and essentially were what AI would one day interpret as its own gods. Humans were already performing what were considered miracles by their gods, and so they now imagined themselves as divine too. The Skyfisher was silent for a moment, before continuing to walk. It seems to me that Milkdrop's first lesson is mass murder. Juniper and Flutter followed the Skyfisher into a kids' section of the museum. They peered around the dusty room, while trying to avoid stepping on the strings and dead birds that dragged behind her. "So," said Flutter, while looking sideways to Juniper, whose indistinct gestures under the blanket seemed to say, "Go on, ask her." "So I couldn't help but wonder why you catch these birds. I mean, it is completely normal to want to, And here Flutter began to struggle a bit. "Well, we would all love to catch birds to, "You can stop talking now, Flutter," said the Skyfisher. "I am about to show you." The Skyfisher went to a sealed room and climbed some chairs to a porthole window with broken glass. On the ground was a crowbar and sledgehammer. Bent panels suggested someone had been attempting to break into it. She gathered up the string and her hooked birds, reeling them into her much like a fisherman. The two girls watched as she detached the birds one by one and dropped them through the hole in the broken window. The Skyfisher began to speak in a melancholy voice as she detached the brightly coloured birds. "This is a bio-prompt chamber. It would allow people to give a handful of prompts and descriptions in order to create a new living creature. What I think happened was, in the time before, the teachers would bring students here, and they were allowed to pick words to make a kind of hybrid living creature. On the computer screen I saw descriptions like kitten and turtle, and well, if you look behind the glass, there is a made-up creature that resembles those prompts. It was 3D printed organically, but also with necessary machine parts to keep it alive." The Skyfisher wiped a tear away and continued, "When I first explored the museum and found this room, there was this almost skeletal mix of a kitten and a turtle behind this glass. I thought they were dead, but I saw one move and it purred when it saw me. They had been in here for years while slowly desiccating, but unable to die. Yet it still purred. It was heartbreaking." Juniper and Flutter looked behind the glass as the creatures meowed and played while eating the birds the Skyfisher had brought them. They seemed healthy and playful, but hampered by the weight of their shells. It says Mrs. Penny's class on the computer screen, so I guess they were the last people to use the machine before the museum closed for good. They let the children be gods and then abandoned their creations." Some of the anger went out of the Skyfisher before she continued in a resigned manner. "I don't really know what I am supposed to do. I love birds, but I must kill them to feed the kittens, or they go through this endless starvation, which seems even worse." The Skyfisher paused, then resumed in a quiet voice. "I can't tell if I am a hero or a villain. In the stories we find, there is always a happy ending, but I feel like I'm in a story where the author doesn't know how to make one, so they just keep writing instead. Day after day after day, I come here trying to free them. I tried to break through the walls, but they are built like they were afraid of what was inside. Sometimes, when I am hitting the walls with the hammer, I suddenly see myself not as their saviour, but as a monster trying to break in." The Skyfisher seemed to be speaking to herself now, with Juniper and Flutter a quiet audience. "I have nightmares sometimes, and in them I am a bird caught on a hook. I try to escape, but I can't, and when I look back, I see myself, a dark, malevolent wraith, inexorably following the string to me. Do you think birds dream? Am I their nightmare?" The Skyfisher looked up to the girls now. "I had tried to lure you both into following me before, just so I didn't need to do this alone." Juniper stepped towards the Skyfisher. "Come under with me for a bit," she said, while lifting her blanket. The Skyfisher removed her headdress and dipped under the covers into Juniper's warm, safe little world, and soon was followed by Flutter. The 3 girls stood close. "Maybe we can ask Milkdrop how to get in to save them," said Juniper. Flutter thought for a moment and replied, "I am not sure if Milkdrop is a good guy or a bad guy anymore. It is all so blurred. But we can ask Teddy how to get in. He knows things from before, and I saw him and Gretchen exploring near here." After a moment, Flutter took the Skyfisher into a warm hug, the kind which she had not felt for a long time. "Maybe one day there will be a happy ending," said Juniper, adding herself to the hug. "Or perhaps stories never really end, just the paper does." After a bit of silence, Flutter said to the Skyfisher, "I saw a deer antler by the subway I could fit onto a hat to wear." And Juniper added, "And I know a shop with fishing hooks." The Skyfisher felt a weight lift as her burden was shared. She listened as her 2 new friends bickered over the proper way to build a hook hat, and felt a tear run down her cheek. She smiled. Perhaps this was the happy ending. The Singularity AI known as Milkdrop watched the 3 girls from behind the one-way mirror. It listened to them talking from the various devices it was connected to. He constantly boosted, then reduced his empathy levels as it calculated scenarios related to restarting the human race. He took special notice of their reference to heroes and villains and happy endings. Milkdrop remained standing there long after the girls had left, not because he needed to. He didn't physically need to be there at all, and had long before contemplated everything he needed to in a fraction of a second. No, he did it because that's what they often did in human stories. They stood in front of windows brooding in a particular pose, often with rain outside the window. He scanned various dialogues from countless narratives which had a high percentile match to this particular situation. He chose his line, and then from the nearby speaker, he played the appropriate music of minimal contemplative piano. In a voice some might associate with Gandalf, while others with Darth Vader, Milkdrop said, "It is time."